A lone surfer floats in the eerie stillness of the morning sea. Suddenly, a massive fin cuts through the water, circling him with chilling intent. Before he can react, a jolt from below throws him into the dark depths. Blood clouds the water as sharp teeth tear into flesh. Desperate splashes echo, but there's no escape. The predator drags him under, leaving only a haunting silence. This video takes you into 6 real-life shark attacks that turned peaceful waters into nightmares. On September 10, 2000, it was a chilly morning at Stinson Beach, Northern California. The sky was a soft gray, the waves were rough, and the beach was mostly empty. The surfers loved this place for its strong waves, but the locals knew it for something else: great white sharks. This area was one of the spots where these sharks were seen often, and every surfer knew it. The sharks were drawn to the cold water and the many seals that swam there. Danny Wilkins, a 31-year-old surfer, didn't worry much about it. He lived nearby and had been surfing here alone for years. Danny wasn't afraid of sharks, he respected them, but he believed he knew how to handle himself in the water. He was well-built, had sun-bleached hair, and his tanned skin showed he spent a lot of time in the ocean. That day he decided to go surfing early to catch the best waves. Around 6:30 a.m., Danny arrived at the beach with his blue surfboard under his arm. A few other surfers were also getting ready. There was Mike, a 45-year-old man with a bushy beard, who often brought his son Ethan, a 14-year-old who was learning to surf. Mike waved at Danny, but Danny was focused. He wanted to get out there quickly before the bigger crowd showed up. Also, there was Jenna, a 26-year-old surfer who had moved from Florida a year ago. She had heard stories about sharks but had never seen one herself. She watched Danny as he paddled out into the deeper water. At 7 a.m., Danny reached the lineup, the spot where surfers wait for waves. He floated on his board, looking at the water ahead, waiting for the next big wave. The water was colder than usual, and there was an odd stillness. As he sat there, he thought about catching a wave that would set the tone for the day. Meanwhile, Mike and Ethan were practicing on smaller waves closer to shore, and Jenna was starting to paddle out, though she was still far behind. Suddenly, at around 7:40 a.m., Danny saw something in the distance. It was a fin. It was big, unmistakable, and slowly moving toward him. It was a great white shark. Danny froze, hoping the shark would just pass by. He knew not to panic. Sharks usually didn't attack humans. They sometimes got curious, but usually just swam away. But this one was different. It was circling him, slowly and deliberately, like it was inspecting him. Danny's heart raced, but he tried to stay calm. He stayed still on his board, not wanting to draw attention. But then something else caught his eye. A smaller fin appeared in the water. It was a juvenile shark, about 8 feet long, swimming more boldly toward him. The younger shark seemed less cautious, moving closer to Danny's board. It bumped the board slightly, a sign of curiosity. Danny felt a jolt of fear, but he knew he had to keep his cool. Jenna, who was paddling closer, noticed Danny's board tilting strangely. She couldn't see the sharks, but she felt something was off. She yelled to Mike, who was riding a small wave nearby, telling him that something was happening to Danny. Mike squinted toward Danny, but he was still too far away to see the fins clearly. Back in the water, Danny was trying to stay balanced. The young shark's bump had shaken him, but he was still upright. But then, in an instant, everything changed. The juvenile shark charged at him suddenly, knocking Danny off his board and into the water. The water splashed violently as Danny tried to get back on his board. His legs thrashed and the juvenile shark darted around him. The larger shark, still circling, began to move in closer now, sensing the commotion. Mike and Ethan saw Danny fall off his board. Mike yelled to Ethan to stay closer to the shore, then started paddling out quickly, his face tense with worry. Jenna was also moving fast now, her strokes strong as she tried to reach Danny in time. Danny was trying to get back on his board when he felt a sharp pain in his leg. The juvenile shark had bitten him. He kicked hard, trying to shake it off, but the shark's teeth were deep. Blood spread in the water, which seemed to excite the larger shark. It swam faster toward Danny, who was losing strength. His vision blurred and his body felt heavy as he tried to reach his board. Jenna was now close enough to see the sharks. Her eyes widened in shock. She screamed for help, her voice breaking through the morning air. Mike paddled even harder, adrenaline pushing him forward. Ethan, still closer to shore, was confused, but could see the panic in his father's movements. The larger shark made its move. It came at Danny from the side, its mouth wide open. Danny felt a crushing pain around his torso as the shark bit down. He tried to push it away, but he was too weak. The shark dragged him down under the water, its massive body thrashing as it tried to hold its grip. Jenna watched helplessly, knowing she couldn't do anything but shout for help. She saw Danny's board floating on the surface, but Danny was gone. Mike reached the spot where Danny had been. He saw the blood in the water, but there was no sign of Danny or the sharks. He shouted Danny's name repeatedly, but there was no answer. Jenna caught up with him, tears streaming down her face. They both knew it was too late. Back on shore, Ethan was trying to figure out what was happening. He saw the frantic movements of his father and Jenna, but he couldn't understand why Danny wasn't coming back up. A few beachgoers had also started to gather, pointing toward the water, unsure of what was happening. Mike and Jenna eventually returned to shore, exhausted and shaken. They told the lifeguards and other surfers about what they had seen. A rescue team was called, but it was clear that this was now a recovery mission, not a rescue. The story spread quickly among the local community and news outlets. Danny's disappearance shocked everyone. How did the details reach the public? Jenna's testimony, Mike's desperate attempts to save Danny, and the blood-stained waters were more than enough to piece together the tragic story. The scene was too clear for anyone to misunderstand what had happened. The rescue team confirmed the shark attack based on the damage to Danny's board and the blood in the water. The beach was closed for a few days as authorities investigated, but no sharks were found. The ocean remained silent and vast as if nothing had happened. Only the locals, the surfers, and the beach remembered the man who had once challenged the waves alone until the day the ocean claimed him. It was June 17, 2004, and the morning was already warm at Clearwater Beach, Florida. The waves were gentle, and the water stretched out, calm and inviting. It was the kind of day that called for adventure on the open sea. The Gulf of Mexico has always been a favorite spot for nature lovers and adventurers alike. Catherine Holloway, a 29-year-old nature enthusiast, was one of them. She had lived in Florida her whole life, enjoying its wildlife, from the calm manatees to the dolphins that often danced near the shore. But she also knew about the predators beneath the surface, like the mako shark. Mako sharks, known for their speed and agility, were common in the Gulf. They could swim up to 45 miles per hour and leap out of the water to catch prey. They were powerful hunters, their sharp teeth capable of slicing through fish and smaller sea creatures. Catherine had read a lot about them, but she never thought she'd have a close encounter with one. On this morning, Catherine prepared her red kayak, checking her paddle and gear carefully. She wore a bright yellow life vest, strapped her waterproof bag behind her, and pushed the kayak into the shallow water. By 8 a.m., she was paddling steadily away from the shore, heading toward deeper waters. Catherine enjoyed the rhythmic sound of her paddle dipping in and out of the water. She was a skilled kayaker, having spent years exploring the coast. The sun was rising quickly, its rays bouncing off the water, making it sparkle. By 9:30 a.m., Catherine was about 2 miles offshore. She stopped for a moment, letting her kayak drift as she reached for her water bottle. As she took a sip, she noticed a sudden ripple in the water about 30 feet away. She paused, looking around carefully. Her heart beat a little faster, but she tried to stay calm. Dolphins often surfaced near kayaks, curious about the human visitors. But this time it wasn't a dolphin. The dark shape beneath the water was larger, moving with an unsettling speed. Catherine felt a sudden jolt. Her kayak rocked violently to the side. She grabbed the sides to steady herself. Her eyes darted around the water. She realized what it was almost instantly: a mako shark. The shark had bumped her kayak, likely curious about the unusual shape above. Catherine's mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do next. She dipped her paddle into the water and tried to move slowly, hoping to put some distance between herself and the predator. But the mako was relentless. It began circling her kayak, its dorsal fin cutting through the water's surface. Catherine's breathing grew quick and she paddled faster, trying to keep the kayak stable. The shark, driven by the flickering sunlight that reflected off Catherine's paddle, charged again, this time harder. The kayak tilted sharply, and Catherine nearly fell into the water. She fought to keep her balance, using the paddle to push herself upright. Her arms shook from the effort, but she managed to steady the kayak. The Mako continued its aggressive circles, sometimes diving beneath the kayak, making it impossible for Catherine to predict its next move. She kept paddling, her strokes becoming desperate. She aimed the kayak back toward the shore, but it was still a long way off. She had no choice but to keep moving and hope the shark would lose interest. But it didn't. The Mako made another charge, ramming the kayak from the side. Catherine was thrown off balance again, her body jolting forward. She gripped the kayak's edge tightly, her knuckles white with fear. She used her paddle to try and push the shark away, but it felt like trying to push back a speeding car. Suddenly, the shark bumped the kayak from beneath, lifting it slightly out of the water. Catherine's heart raced as she clung to the kayak, her legs dangling close to the surface. She quickly pulled them up, knowing the Mako could strike at any moment. She could feel her muscles burning from the effort, but adrenaline kept her going. Minutes felt like hours as Catherine tried to stay focused. The Mako continued to circle, but its movements were becoming more unpredictable. It would disappear for a few seconds, only to reappear on the other side of the kayak, bumping it again and again. Catherine's paddle became her only weapon, and she swung it at the water, trying to create splashes to confuse the shark. Then the Mako came in closer than ever. It struck the kayak from the front, almost lifting it completely out of the water. Catherine's body was thrown backward, and she nearly slipped into the sea. She managed to hook her arm around the side of the kayak, clinging on for dear life. The Mako swam past her, its large, sleek body visible beneath the clear water. She tried to catch her breath, but the shark wasn't done. It charged again, this time coming up directly underneath. The kayak tipped dangerously, water splashing over the sides. Catherine gritted her teeth, holding on to the sides as tightly as she could. She was exhausted, her arms shaking uncontrollably. Just as she felt she couldn't hold on any longer, she heard a distant sound. A boat engine. Catherine turned her head, spotting a small fishing boat about 100 yards away. The boat was heading her way, its speed increasing as it drew closer. The Mako seemed to notice the approaching noise as well, pausing its relentless attacks. The boat was captained by two fishermen, Alan and Joe, who had been checking their nets nearby. They saw the unusual splashing and quickly realized it was a kayaker in trouble. Alan steered the boat closer while Joe grabbed a rope, preparing to pull Catherine aboard. Catherine felt a surge of hope as the boat came closer. She waved her paddle frantically, signaling for help. The Mako, now cautious, began to move away from the kayak, sensing the larger presence of the boat. Alan shouted instructions to Catherine, telling her to hold on to the rope Joe tossed toward her. Catherine grabbed it with shaky hands, pulling herself closer to the boat. The fisherman hauled Catherine aboard quickly, pulling her to safety. She collapsed on the deck, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The Mako lingered for a moment, its fins slicing through the water a final time before it swam off into the deeper sea, its pursuit over. Alan and Joe checked Catherine for injuries. Apart from a few bruises and scratches, she was okay. The three of them sat on the deck for a moment, watching the empty sea where the Mako had been. The fisherman took Catherine back to shore, her kayak tied securely to the side of the boat. She was shaken but grateful, knowing that she had come dangerously close to the edge that day. It was July 23, 2007, off the coast of Isla Mujeres, Mexico. The warm, clear waters surrounding this small island were well known for their colorful reefs and diverse marine life. Tourists and divers came from all over to explore its shallow coves, where bright fish swam among coral formations. The area was home to various shark species, including the reef shark, a fast and curious predator that usually stayed near the reef edges. Kyle Lawson, a 22-year-old nature lover, had come to Isla Mujeres for a week-long snorkeling trip. He was fascinated by the underwater world and often spent hours exploring it. He had heard about the reef sharks but wasn't particularly worried. They rarely attacked humans and were more likely to be curious than aggressive. He had read that they were around 5 to 7 feet long, quick swimmers, and often misunderstood. That morning, Kyle woke up early. The sun was barely rising as he grabbed his gear and walked toward the beach. By 8 a.m., he was at the water's edge. wearing a mask, snorkel, and fins. He had a small inflatable boat anchored nearby, which he had rented to carry his equipment and serve as a safe point if needed. He slipped into the water, feeling the coolness as he adjusted his mask. Slowly, he began swimming toward the reef, paddling with relaxed, steady kicks. He enjoyed the bright fish darting around him, the soft swaying of the sea plants, and the colors of the coral below. He was about 200 yards from shore, near a secluded cove known for its abundance of marine life. The water here was still shallow, only about 12 feet deep, with the reef forming a natural barrier. About 30 minutes into his swim, Kyle noticed a movement out of the corner of his eye. It was a reef shark, around 6 feet long, gliding along the edge of the reef. Kyle paused, floating still in the water, and watched the shark's graceful movements. He felt more curious than afraid. It wasn't unusual for sharks to pass by. He assumed the shark would move on. But as Kyle resumed swimming, the shark didn't leave. Instead, it circled back, moving closer to him with slow, deliberate strokes. Kyle tried to keep his movements calm, aware that splashing could attract more attention. He kept his eyes on the shark while trying to continue his exploration. At first, it seemed like the shark was just observing him, but it soon became clear that it wasn't going away. The shark's movements became more focused, its sharp eyes fixed on Kyle. As he tried to swim away slowly, the shark matched his pace, staying just behind him. Kyle felt a wave of anxiety. He knew he needed to stay calm, but the reality of being followed by a predator was overwhelming. The shark's behavior changed as he quickened his kicks, its body language shifting from curious to alert. Kyle's breaths became faster, his chest tightening as he tried to control his panic. The shark drew even closer, now only a few feet away. He knew he had to reach his boat, which was anchored about 100 yards away, but the shark's proximity made every movement risky. Kyle slowed his strokes, hoping the shark would lose interest, but the creature remained locked on him. Each time Kyle paused, the shark inched closer, its sleek body moving smoothly through the water. It was almost as if the shark was trying to provoke him into more frantic movements. Kyle tried to remember what he'd read about reef sharks. They were opportunistic hunters, but they usually only attacked if they felt threatened or excited by sudden movements. He tried to move steadily, even though his instincts told him to swim as fast as he could. With his heart pounding, Kyle decided to make a slow, gradual turn toward the boat. He began paddling in that direction, keeping one eye on the shark. The shark continued to shadow him, never breaking its gaze. Kyle's legs felt heavy, his muscles burning from the slow, controlled swimming. He tried not to kick too much, knowing that the thrashing might signal prey behavior to the shark. Halfway to the boat, the shark suddenly darted forward, bumping Kyle's fin. He jerked instinctively, trying to regain his balance. The sudden movement seemed to trigger the shark's hunting instinct. It circled more rapidly, its movements sharper. Kyle forced himself to slow down, clinging to the hope that keeping steady would make the shark lose interest. The boat was now within sight, but Kyle felt the shark's presence closing in. He couldn't afford any sudden moves. His legs ached, his breathing was labored, and his mind raced with fear. He reached out to touch the boat's side, his fingertips brushing the rubber edge. The shark remained close, circling one last time before finally turning away, its interest fading. Kyle pulled himself onto the boat, collapsing in exhaustion. His hands shook as he looked down at the water. The reef shark swam back toward the reef, moving calmly as if the encounter had never happened. Miguel Reyes took a deep breath and adjusted his diving mask. The morning sun shone over the Caribbean Sea, making the water seem calm and inviting. It was April 5th, 2010, a day that had started like any other for Miguel. He was preparing to lead a scuba tour off the coast of Cozumel, Mexico. Miguel, a seasoned diver at 34, had guided hundreds of tourists through these warm waters. He felt at home here, navigating the coral reefs and spotting all kinds of marine life. Miguel had 4 divers with him that day: Sarah, a 28-year-old teacher from Canada; Lucas, a 35-year-old engineer from Brazil; Anna, a 45-year-old writer from Germany; and Jordan, a 30-year-old photographer from the U.S. This was their first time diving in Cozumel. Miguel saw the mix of excitement and nervousness on their faces as they prepared to descend. He gave a quick rundown of the dive plan, explaining what to expect. Colorful fish, sea turtles, and maybe a nurse shark or two resting near the reef caves. By 9:30 a.m. the group entered the water, slowly sinking beneath the surface. The divers followed Miguel's lead, staying close together. They moved along the reef, amazed by the coral shapes and the schools of fish darting around them. Miguel pointed out a sea turtle gliding by, and the group paused to watch. He felt a sense of pride as he saw their eyes widen with wonder. Moments like this made his job rewarding. After about 20 minutes, Miguel signaled for a short break near a deeper section of the reef. The divers floated in place, adjusting their breathing and checking their air levels. Miguel's gauge showed he still had plenty of oxygen left, so he decided to explore a nearby cave while the group rested. He had seen nurse sharks resting here before, and he wanted to check it out for any new sights. Miguel swam closer to the cave entrance, peering inside. The cave was dark, but he could make out a large, shadowy figure lying still at the bottom. It was a nurse shark about 10 feet long. Miguel knew nurse sharks were usually harmless, but they could react aggressively if startled. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb it. As he floated near the cave, the nurse shark suddenly stirred. Miguel felt a shift in the water as the shark rose from the sandy bottom. It turned sharply, heading straight toward him. Miguel backed up instinctively, but the shark was fast. It cornered him against the reef, its movements defensive and quick. Miguel tried to stay calm, but his heart pounded. He knew any sudden movements could make things worse. He remained as still as he could, hoping the shark would back off. But the nurse shark wasn't retreating. It was blocking his way, its eyes locked on him. Miguel's breathing grew heavier, and he felt the air leaving his tank more quickly. The shark swam closer, its wide mouth snapping at Miguel. It wasn't a full bite, but the shark's rough skin grazed Miguel's leg. A sharp pain shot through him, and he saw a small cloud of blood in the water. Miguel bit down on his mouthpiece, trying to ignore the sting and stay focused. He couldn't panic, not with his group waiting nearby and his oxygen depleting. He quickly checked his gauge. His air supply was dropping faster than he expected, likely from the stress of the situation. He needed to get back to the group, but the shark was still too close. Miguel moved slowly, inching along the reef to create some distance. He kept his eyes on the shark, making sure not to provoke it further. The shark seemed to hesitate, giving Miguel a small window to act. He pushed off the reef gently, propelling himself toward the group. His leg ached, but he managed to keep moving. He reached the divers, signaling them to stay calm and prepare to ascend. The tourists were confused, their eyes wide as they noticed Miguel's injury. He kept his movement slow and deliberate, hoping to prevent any panic. Miguel led the ascent, splitting his focus between watching the shark and monitoring his oxygen level. The shark lingered near the reef but didn't pursue them. As they rose, Miguel felt relief mixed with exhaustion. His leg throbbed, but he knew they were almost safe. They broke the surface, gasping for fresh air. Miguel guided the divers toward the boat, his leg trailing blood in the water. He climbed aboard last, collapsing on the deck. The tourists looked shaken, but they were safe. Miguel winced as he inspected his leg, just a scrape, but a reminder of how quickly things could change underwater. Wade Turner wiped sweat from his forehead as he prepared his fishing gear. It was July 18th, 2012, a hot and humid morning in the Louisiana Bayou near Lake Pontchartrain. Wade was a 38-year-old commercial fisherman known in the area for his rugged work ethic and deep knowledge of the waters. For years he had fished these shallow, murky waters alone, catching catfish, redfish, and sometimes alligators. He knew the dangers of the bayou. Alligators were common, and bull sharks often lurked in the shallows. Unlike most sharks, bull sharks can swim in both salt and fresh water, making them frequent visitors in these brackish waters. They were aggressive, strong, and capable of hunting in areas just a few feet deep. Wade's boat, a small but sturdy skiff, was anchored in the shallows that morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting an orange glow over the water. He had started early, hoping for a good haul before the heat became unbearable. Wade tossed his line into the water, adjusting his grip on the fishing rod. The day had started slowly, with only a few nibbles. By mid-morning, he had caught some catfish and was focused on casting deeper into the channel. He felt a tug, stronger than usual. His rod bent sharply, signaling something big on the line. Wade pulled back, bracing his feet against the boat's edge. He expected a large redfish, but this was different. The weight on the line was immense and the tugging was erratic, with sudden bursts of speed. Wade's experience told him this was no ordinary catch. He tightened his grip, trying to reel in whatever was on the other end. As he pulled, a dark shape surfaced briefly, thrashing violently. It was a bull shark about 7 feet long. Wade's heart raced. He didn't want to lose his equipment, but he knew keeping a hooked bull shark was dangerous. The shark thrashed harder, its body twisting in the water, sending waves splashing against the boat. Wade tried to maneuver his rod carefully, but the shark's strength was overwhelming. He reached for his knife, intending to cut the line before the situation got worse. But as he leaned over to slice the line, the shark gave a sudden, powerful yank. The force knocked Wade off balance, and before he could react, he was pulled into the water. He hit the murky surface with a splash, disoriented for a moment. When he regained his senses, he found himself waist-deep in the bayou, still holding the rod. The shark, feeling trapped, was now furious. Wade struggled to keep his footing in the soft, muddy bottom. He managed to let go of the rod, hoping the shark would swim off, but it stayed close, circling him aggressively. He reached for his knife, the only weapon he had left. The water around him felt heavy, and his heart pounded as he tried to stay alert. Wade knew bull sharks could attack swiftly, and he had no clear path back to the boat. The shark made a quick turn, charging at him. Wade swung his knife instinctively, feeling the blade graze the shark's rough skin. It wasn't a fatal hit, but it seemed to anger the shark further. It circled faster, stirring up the muddy water. Wade tried to move toward the boat, but each step was slow and difficult in the thick mud. The shark lunged again, this time closer, its snout bumping Wade's leg hard enough to knock him off balance. He stumbled but quickly got back up, the knife clutched tightly in his hand. Wade felt a surge of pain in his calf, a shallow bite from the shark's quick snap. Blood mixed with the murky water, and Wade's mind raced. He had to move carefully, avoiding sudden splashes that could trigger another attack. The boat was only a few yards away, but it felt much farther, with the shark still circling him. Wade tried to keep his movements slow and steady, but the fear of another attack made it hard to stay calm. The shark paused briefly, as if assessing its next move. Wade took the chance to edge closer to the boat. He moved sideways, keeping his eyes on the shark while stepping carefully. The water felt colder now, and Wade's breathing was heavy. His leg ached from the bite, but he couldn't afford to slow down. Suddenly, the shark charged again, its body cutting through the water with force. Wade swung his knife as hard as he could, feeling it make contact with the shark's head. It wasn't a deep wound, but it was enough to make the shark veer off temporarily. Wade took the opportunity to move faster, his eyes locked on the boat. The shark, now more cautious, circled wider, but it wasn't leaving. Wade was only a few steps from the boat, but his energy was draining fast. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the pain. With one final surge of effort, he reached the edge of the boat, grabbing onto the side. Wade pulled himself up, his body trembling with exhaustion. He collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air. The shark lingered in the water below, its dark shape visible beneath the surface. Wade's leg throbbed, the wound bleeding steadily, but he was safe, at least for now. He knew the danger wasn't over until he was back on shore, but he had survived the encounter. Emma Collins adjusted her swim cap, feeling the morning breeze off the coast of the Maldives. It was June 12, 2015. She was here to complete a grueling training session for an upcoming open-water marathon swim. The crystal-clear waters of the Indian Ocean stretched far into the distance, calm but filled with unknowns. The Maldives was famous for its diverse marine life, including dolphins, sea turtles, and occasionally tiger sharks. Tiger sharks, known for their size and aggressive behavior, were frequent visitors in these waters, especially attracted to disturbances like splashing. They could reach up to 15 feet in length, their dark stripes visible against their broad bodies. Emma, a 32-year-old athlete from Australia, had been training for months to conquer long-distance swims. She was strong, with lean muscles from years of intense training. Her support boat, a small but sturdy vessel, bobbed nearby. On board were her coach, Grant, a 45-year-old former swimmer who had coached her for years, and Lucy, a 28-year-old medic responsible for her safety. They had supplies, a first aid kit, and a long pole to reach Emma if needed. Emma was focused. By 8 a.m., she slipped into the water, feeling its warm embrace. She began her swim steadily, her strokes powerful and consistent. The support boat kept pace beside her, with Grant and Lucy watching closely. The plan was for Emma to swim 5 miles in open water. It was part of her preparation for a 20-mile marathon scheduled later that year. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Emma found her rhythm, cutting through the water with each stroke. Her breathing was steady, and she felt strong. She loved the freedom of open water and the challenge of pushing through the waves. Grant shouted occasional encouragement from the boat while Lucy monitored Emma's movements for any signs of fatigue. Around 9:30 a.m., Emma was about 2 miles from shore. She noticed something in the water, a faint shadow beneath her. She slowed down, trying to make sense of what it was. Her experience told her it could be a large fish, but the shape was broader and moved differently. Then the shadow became clearer. It was a tiger shark, around 10 feet long, circling beneath her. Emma's heart pounded. She knew tiger sharks could be unpredictable, especially when drawn by splashing. She tried to control her breathing, knowing that panic would make things worse. Her strokes became slower and more deliberate as she attempted to keep the shark from becoming more aggressive. The support boat crew noticed the change in her pace, their expressions turning tense. Emma signaled to Grant and Lucy that a shark was present. Lucy grabbed a radio to call for backup while Grant leaned over the side, holding the long pole in case Emma needed to be pulled in quickly. But Emma couldn't just abandon the swim. She had trained for situations like this, encounters with marine predators that required calm and calculated actions. She needed to maintain her composure and avoid sudden splashes, which might provoke the shark further. The shark's circles tightened. It seemed drawn to Emma's kicking, even as she tried to keep her legs steady. Emma knew that tiger sharks were opportunistic hunters, and her slow movements could either calm it or trigger its curiosity further. She kept moving forward, trying to cover the distance without making sudden motions. Grant and Lucy were now fully focused on Emma's situation. Grant shouted instructions, trying to keep her calm while signaling her to stay close to the boat. Lucy prepared the medical kit, anticipating any possible injuries. The boat's crew used a pole to splash the water near the shark, attempting to distract it, but the predator remained fixated on Emma. Emma felt exhaustion creeping in. Each stroke was slower than the last, her arms heavy from the tension. She kept her head above water more often now, her eyes constantly scanning for the shark's location. The creature's dark stripes became clearer as it moved closer, its body large and intimidating. Emma tried to shift direction slightly, hoping to create more space between her and the predator, but the shark adjusted quickly, keeping pace. The support boat crew decided to intervene more aggressively. Grant swung the pole into the water near the shark, trying to create a barrier. Lucy used an air horn, hoping the noise would startle it. The shark seemed momentarily distracted, giving Emma a small window to increase her speed. She pushed forward, her legs burning from the effort, but she couldn't afford to slow down. The shark, however, wasn't leaving. It resumed circling, this time closer than before. Emma could see its broad head and sharp eyes as it swam alongside her. It made a sudden lunge, closing the distance between them in a split second. Emma felt a rush of fear but managed to dodge slightly, her arms slicing the water just out of the shark's reach. She knew her survival depended on keeping a calm mind despite the terror. Grant shouted more urgently now, urging Emma to move toward the boat. Emma angled her body, using a burst of energy to swim faster. The boat inched closer to her, but the waves made it difficult to maintain a steady approach. Lucy extended the pole, urging Emma to grab it, but the shark remained too close for comfort. Emma felt her strength fading. Her arms were tired, her breathing heavy, but she knew stopping wasn't an option. She made slow progress toward the boat, keeping her strokes controlled and steady. The shark made another sudden rush, bumping Emma's side. She felt the impact, her body jolting from the force, but it wasn't a full bite. She swung her arms more forcefully now, desperate to create space. Finally, the boat was within arm's reach. Emma lunged for the pole, grabbing it with both hands. Grant and Lucy pulled with all their strength, dragging her toward the boat. The shark made one last pass, its body brushing against Emma's leg, but she managed to lift herself out of the water just in time. Emma collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air. Her arms shook from exhaustion, and her legs were scraped from the encounter. Grant and Lucy checked her quickly for injuries, finding only bruises and minor cuts. They kept their eyes on the water, making sure the shark didn't return. Emma lay on the deck, her breathing ragged. The shark's presence lingered below, its shadow visible for a moment before disappearing into the depths. Emma's heart still raced, but she knew she had survived.